This is Illegitimate Scholar, a weekly cultural anthropology interview podcast.
Yeah, we're the Good Old Boys of the Good Old Boys podcast, Good Old Boys with a Z on Patreon. We do weekly live shows. We like to talk about politics, what's going on in the news, but we also like to dip our toes into usually history. But when we're talking to the ill scholar here, we'll get into stuff like the history of the planet and societies and cultures and biology.
Yeah, we also are reviewing every single episode of the X-Files. I'm Bog Beef.
Forgot about that, dude.
That's Maarek. Goodoldboys.com patreon.com/goodoldboys, and wvsapparel.com has our merch. wvsapparel.com.
Yeah. So and patronage, right, guys?
That's the pillar of the show, the theme of the show. It's this kind of adapted thing off of Select Theory by Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. It's something we talk about a lot. It's a model of understanding politics where you see patronage as the fundamental building block of all politics. That's the theme of the show. If you want to hear somebody talk about patronage, check us out, because that's all we talk about.
Yeah,
it's not
and
all.
It's an amazing theory, honestly, and I talk about it a lot, sometimes on the show and also on Twitter. I know I tag you probably 3 or 4 times a week, Bog Beef, when I see something perfect for patronage.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic. It is kind of shocking when you first hear it, but I don't think it's that crazy for there to be some kind of fundamental building block of human organization like that. Yeah.
It's not crazy, because if you ask, some people will complain and it's too simplistic, but if you ask them the basic idea, they'll agree, oh yeah, that's this obvious, but it's really not obvious to people anymore. I don't think people understand that it's there under the surface of everything.
It's kind of like all food at some point comes down to calories. That does not mean that the only thing there is to discuss about the difference between gutter oil and in a 7-course French meal is the calories, but everything still does come down to calories.
Yeah, 100%. And like, it's the patron client relationship, right? And that comes from the Romans.
Well, it's probably,
the word.
It must. It must. But yeah, like the people who made this model, yeah, it has to, because the people who used this model explicitly, like, was the Romans. Yeah.
Yeah, like to the patrician, right? Patrician pleb relationship, and this was like this is so perfect for cultural anthropology, because it's like it's behavioral economics in a certain way, because it's about the incentives between people and reciprocity. But to me, when I look at Confucianism, when Confucius was asked what he thought the one word to explain human relationships are, it was reciprocity, and patron systems are reciprocity. And so when you have like a band level, at a band level, there is, and this is like below a tribe where it's very, very primitive humans. There's a relationship. There's a relationship of reciprocity that's kind of not. There are social rules that govern it, but once you get up to these higher chiefdom levels with new technology into the state level, and you come to societies that eventually become global, then they become much more complicated. But to me, the patron relationship is just governed entirely by more complex rules as it grows larger, and that's where you get systems like the technocracy.
Well, the question you asked, this is an illustrative example here. The question you asked earlier, like where the word it does come from Latin. Patron means father. It means daddy. It's like you're paid, and it is a two-way relationship. That's the thing that people get confused. That you have obligations to your patron, but he also has obligations to his client. Sometimes protection, sometimes money. As for the client's obligations to the patron. It could be in our system, unfortunately, sometimes it means you're going to pull a lever and vote for somebody. You're going to give your free labor to organize political campaigns, whatever. Or if Vito Corleone is your patron, it might mean he has to ask a favor of you someday, and you have to say yes because he did you one, and he did a favor for you in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are when you're talking about sort of the way things work at a base level, you can sort of think of things as like an instinctual kind of thing, like, oh well, I'm nice to this person, they're nice to me. But that stuff doesn't really fly anymore once you start getting civilization. Once you have things like lawyers and laws and stuff like that, this is where all the things that are non-intuitive comes from. And also having a model can just help keep you honest. It can get, you can get lost when you're I find a lot of the strongest thinkers in everything, even politics, they may have a different like a lot of times the actual model is not the most important thing in the world. It's kind of what you can do with it and you using it as a base. There are definitely people who think of politics in completely different terms. Like I've heard a good argument for people who think of politics in terms of the availability and price of energy. And like you can really understand things a lot just by going off of that and using that as a base. But it helps you keep you honest, because otherwise, I mean, we would just all tell ourselves what we want to hear all the time. I mean, you know.
Well, there's also an aspect of, like, when you're talking about the modern political system, there are layers of abstraction, and it kind of, I don't know, camouflages stuff. But in theory, because people have been talking a lot lately about the rule of law, right? In theory, the rule of law, if it was actually, if things actually worked that way, would, I guess, I wouldn't say negate patronage, but it would make it a lot less of an influence in your life. Like, in theory, the idea behind the rule of law is, well, you don't need to get somebody to protect you, because the legal system will treat everybody fairly. We'll be on it, all be on an even level. So you won't need somebody there, to keep your enemies from destroying you. Now,
Right.
in practice,
That's a bureaucracy.
yeah, in
Right.
practice,
In
that's
the larger, yeah.
yeah, in practice, that's never been true. But if you look at life in the 20th century, the late 20th century in, like, America, I mean, it was kind of true. You really didn't have to worry. You don't have to worry about the things that you have to worry about in, say, like Mexico, where when you're dealing with like government authorities, or God forbid, non-governmental authorities like cartels, it's entirely a patron-client relationship. And if you don't have a patron, if you don't have a dad, you're in deep trouble. Like, you could die.
Right. Right. And that's like, and this works on a state level too, right? You have like a vassal state versus versus something else. And those themselves come out of much more literal state level patron relationships between individuals and their individual ownerships, from knights to lesser nobles to higher nobles. And that governed most of Europe for a long time, and most of China for a long time as well. I'm sorry, most of Japan had that. China also had a state level system where they were considered. I mean, they literally called themselves the Middle Kingdom, and they had a tributary system with the states around them that recognized them as the authority. And that comes with it protection, but also obligations.
Yeah, you could. I don't know. I don't know enough about China, so I'll ask you this question. Maybe you do. Could you say that what happened into China in the late 19th and early 20th century, when you had like the warlord era, that was a breakdown of that bureaucratic system, and then, for lack of a better term, reversion to a system where, yeah, you have a big man. He's got the most guns. He's got the most men. He gets to dictate what happens in this geographic region.
So there was a bit of an atrophy and old age of the bureaucratic system of the Qing dynasty. I think into the 19th century, they had like these things called banner armies, which were essentially vassal armies of different people. But it didn't become a huge problem. Like the banner armies kind of stopped functioning. It didn't become a huge problem until the British showed up. That was a huge destabilizing force. Up until then, they were doing okay, but in the face of the British coming in and showing the weakness of the Chinese as like the really not being able to do anything, that was an opportunity for lesser the warlords, the lesser warlords, to exert more control and autonomy over the emperor.
I think a good sort of event to like why is this stuff important? Like why not just discuss things like the law or something like that, which are also important in politics, right? I think like a good thing to think of, especially if you're a conservative. There's this moment that happens for like a huge amount of young conservatives where the topic of something gets brought up and you feel honestly like, oh well, the Democrats could never do that. That's explicitly outlawed in the Constitution. Well, the Constitution says they can't do that. Let's not worry about that. Let's talk about the tax rate or something like that. And someone goes, yeah, that doesn't really matter, man. And there's a huge denial. Like I think every young conservative has this moment where you're in denial about this, and you're like, whoa, what do you mean the Constitution doesn't matter? What are you talking about? And then you start, you kind of go through the hit list of this paper. It's not like it doesn't mean anything. It is something that is used in courts or whatever, but it's not what you thought it was. It was not this money back guarantee. And now, as soon as you think about that, things like that, you realize there's another layer to politics that hasn't been. It doesn't mean like the whole world's ending or something. It just means, hey, there's another layer of how people organize themselves other than, oh, there's this law written somewhere. Oh, there's this piece of paper somewhere. Like human government and stuff. It's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and I mean, you could. If this is the problem with talking when you start digging down deep into the meaning of an idea like patronage, it's like so simple and elemental. Like you can go too far deconstructing anything, but like you could make the argument that the rule of law as we know it is kind of a patronage scheme in itself. This is something that powerful people, your patrons, they're going to, here are the rules that we're going to give you so that you can have a regular life and you don't have to worry about somebody shooting you and taking your stuff. These are rules. This is my gift to you. In exchange, you're going to give me, depending on where you live, between like 20 and 45% of your income. Like that's what I'm going to get in exchange for keeping the peace. And the definition of the peace is, here are these rules that everybody has to abide by, which is like, that is, people have talked about this recently. It came up, I think Worthy House. And if it wasn't him, I apologize. Like, the idea of the rule of law, everybody playing by the same rules, that's not a natural thing for human beings. It's really kind of runs counter to how we usually operate.
No. Yeah. So one of you said something earlier where you were talking about the difference between like a non-governmental organization, and in the context of Mexico, of course, it's better to come to odds with the Mexican government than the cartel, I think, in most cases. But like at a certain level, they're both, like, I know I hammer in social construct all the time, but they're both social constructs. And thinking about them differently as cartels versus governments is like, yes, there are differences between them, but one of those differences is just the legitimacy of the organization. And especially with cartels,
yes,
they're at the level, they have air forces and submarines and like RPGs and incredible weapons, and like important people on their payrolls. And like when I think about that, and then I think about where like the rule of law comes from, it really does come from a ritualization of the plunder of a people. That's what it was originally. For most of human history, we're dealing with like conquerors of different people that usually insert themselves as an aristocracy above another people. It was an assumed relationship that the majority of human population was peasants or serfs or underlings, and other people weren't. And in the original, like how this was originally, was that the plunder would be in the form of women and your lives and whatever, because you've lost. And that's who wins the monopoly on violence. And having bureaucracy over time just ritualizes and standardizes that conquest over people. And I don't think people realize that most of us, our DNA or whatever, like over time, we went from conquered people into just our forefathers. They fought for rights over time, or they didn't, and things changed with technology. But you go far back enough, we're all pretty much conquered people, besides select few.
We used to talk about this all the time. There was this era of early Vice TV where they would
So good.
they used to they did the best thing in the world. They would give somebody a camera and a bunch of money and send them out to see crazy things that sort of people had talked about, people had memed about. Like if there was a new UN report that said like South Sudan is the most dangerous place in the world, they would give a guy some money and a camera and say go check that out. People want to hear about it. They just saw this viral article about the most dangerous place in the world. Let's see it. And they would go to these places. What you'd find is you'd have all these primitive patron client governments or whatever. And what you quickly realize, this is included in Bruce Banner and Mosquito's writings, remember, is that there's no functional difference in between a mafia and a government. I mean, they're all the same thing. This is where there's a lot of people. You hear this. There's this sort of naive comment that you'll hear people say a lot. They're like, "Did you know that Al Qaeda like builds hospitals and gives money out to people and stuff?" And it's like, yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. They all these things. They're all the same kind of thing. You're all in the same a similar business. Some of them are kind of private shadows. Some of them only operate at certain edges. Like you could have you could have within the same territory, you could have multiple governments. Like you could in New York City, you could have the explicit the government that issues passports that everyone knows about, and the criminal underworld could be covered by this mafia. Then you could have sort of immigrant groups that are essentially have their own government that is kind of secret, and they're all in the same business. They have the monopoly on violence, etc.
The difference, like it is all
and
the
taxing,
same.
And taxing.
It is all the same thing. Taxes are protection money, and I don't mean that in like I do mean it in a libertarian sense, but not like we got to abolish it because like you're one way or the other, you're gonna pay protection money to somebody. But the difference between a cartel and a local government is that the local government has, in theory, rules for how they can deal with their subjects. What there are rules for them too, that they're not allowed to treat you a certain way, and not do certain things to you. Obviously, a cartel doesn't have this rule. That's the difference between civilization and barbarism. It's not that like there's some magic thing that happened that transformed you. It's just one has rules for how the strong can rule over their subjects, and the other might not necessarily.
Two quick examples.
It requires sorry, Bog Beef, go ahead.
All right, so sorry, two quick examples. Number one, military generals, whenever they have conquered some territory or whatever, immediately basically become like the president of that area, and they rule it. And there's no even transition. Like everyone like literally knows how this works. Like, Napoleon's general just just conquered Spain. Well, he is now basically just like someone that was elected in office or whatever over there, and he knows how to do that. Everyone sort of understands that. Another example we like to use is you learn about politics in school in America. You're going to learn about this guy who was supposed to be the worst guy in one of the worst people in the world. Who's the New York guy?
I'm sorry. Roosevelt?
No,
Mafioso?
No, the big fat guy.
From New York?
Yeah. Boss Tweed. All right, and so Boss Tweed, and so you can look at, and they'll tell you that there was a time when Boss Tweed ran New York, not the city council, not the mayor, not the United States government, and this is absolutely true. When you would pay your taxes to New York City, literally Boss Tweed would, people would pay their taxes, and they would go to the city, and the treasurer would hand like a giant bag of money to Boss Tweed, who was supposed to take it to the bank to deposit this money, and instead he would take about half of it, and then he would deposit the rest for the city services. And you could look at that situation, people are like, wow, so that whatever's going on there, that's completely different than what's going on now. Clearly, everything was just being stolen and it's all gone, right? Well, and you could look at what you got out of the New York City government during that time. So, Boss Tweed was like every sort of big attraction that people go to see in New York City today. The Museum of Modern Art, all these big museums, the library, the Brooklyn Bridge, all these things were built during Boss Tweed's rulership. So, now you go to today when there's nothing illegal going on, basically. I mean, people could have little scams and stuff, but everything is legal. It's all legal if that matters to you, but they don't build anything anymore. And there's no money left. Everything just gets distributed to this huge class of bureaucrats and people with like these weird social jobs and stuff. And you can take these two situations like, well, how can this guy is stealing? That's wrong. That's a sin. He's taking the money from the bag and giving it to his friends. Versus today, everyone's following the law. There's no bad people, whatever. But your money is still gone. And in fact, it's being stolen much more efficiently. We just call that, it's just legal. And this is a huge, huge, huge problem for Western societies. The whole rule of law meme. I mean, there was a lot to like about rule of law. You can see that when Caesar rolls into France, it's not like, oh, we're the Italians, we're here to f up you French guys. No, I mean he's making sort of a similar offer there of like, hey, what if you had this relationship with the state rather than this local big guy? We'll give you a toilet. You'll get somewhere to take a bath. You'll get water. You get some nice roads and stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The Inca did the same thing. They set up food storage wherever they went. They set up food things. They came in. I mean, like if they weren't doing a decent job, there would be more rebellions whenever that happens. And that's kind of like what the divine right of kings ends up being. It's just like if people are, if you go to the most primitive societies, the leaders lead through simply like just by the fact that people will follow them. There's a word for it. I'm forgetting what it is, but they just lead like, what was that? I was thinking consensus or something, but
yeah, I was thinking a more flowery example would be the French word élan.
Oh, okay.
This comes up in honor cultures and stuff like this is why people look at those crazy pictures of Louis the 14th and he's wearing those ridiculous outfits and stuff. That's not for no reason at all. There's a reason why these people, these kings, these big generals, there's a reason why Patton walked around with pearl handled pistols and he looked good and all these kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So there's a number of things that I want that you guys may or may not have heard about. So on the Vice TV topic, do you guys hear about Channel 5 News, Andrew Callahan going into Philadelphia? And he basically like he did an interview with these guys and they're the ones who are selling like I think it was some tranquilizer that like debilitates your skin and like fentanyl. And apparently there's a turf war between the Mexican cartel and a Chinese corporation in Philadelphia, and gang members are like, it's a proxy war where Philadelphia gang members, some of them working for the Chinese, some of them for the cartel, and they're fighting each other.
No.
Yeah, that happened. So that's a thing.
I could definitely see that. So there was this big transition. So back in the old days, like going from like 0 AD to like 1975, if you wanted to get hard drugs, they had to either they were coming on the Silk Road from either Afghanistan or later on they had to come from these certain specific places in South America where you could grow stuff. Doesn't matter what kind of gangster, if you're an Italian gangster, if you're a drug dealer in Africa, in China, in over the road, you must be connected to these networks in these two places. And once you there was a massive revolution when the Silk Road website came out. Which was a completely different, the dark web or whatever. You had guys. I mean, if you're a guy under 40, if you're an American male under 40, I would imagine many other nationalities had this sort of thing happen to them where there were guys from your high school that did not have connections. You know that they didn't know anybody that all of a sudden got into the drug game. How? They totally overstepped every cartel and all those people that used to control the flow of drugs, and they just got it mailed to their house from China.
You talked about this on Twitter, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bog Beef's a great follow on Twitter as well as the podcast, by the way.
That's
so is Marbeck. Sorry.
That's a revolutionary thing, and you could see that is also the fentanyl revolution. If you wanted heroin, there is a small patch of land in Afghanistan. I think there's a couple of the places like Turkey and stuff the only places that got the poppy. Not anymore. Right. Not anymore. Now that's what fentanyl is. That's why fentanyl is so different. Fentanyl is just synthetic, and that is a revolutionary product.
Yeah, and that's like, this is something I talk about a lot. I probably talked about with you guys.
By the way,
technology.
Real quick, that's like the potato coming out to countries that only have rice. Go ahead.
Right, and that's a technology. It's a food technology. It's a new energy source that can be used, and it was. I mean, and that's why like colonization. One of the tools of colonization is what you use to make a living, like importing horses and pigs and cows. Like in the 17th century Native American wars in New England, they were wars of annihilation on both sides. We just won. But the Native Americans would shoot cows full of arrows, and part of it was sending a message. They would shoot them well after they were dead, hundreds of arrows pinned into a cow, like denying them food. The other direction was just as bad, if not worse, because they were more successful. Technology disrupts the social order. It disrupts the existing social order when technology changes. So this new technology of the internet and the Silk Road brings this new thing where new people can get into the drug trade without these other relationships that you were talking about. And this happens throughout history. I love that. Did you guys ever hear about the time that the Hasidic Jews took over a precinct in New York City?
No, like a police precinct?
Yes. Really? You never heard about this?
No.
Yeah. I feel like this is right up your alley. Sorry, whatever you guys want to go off of what I said after that, but I thought you would love to see this. I mean, this is a digitized one from 1978, and obviously I don't pay for the New York Times because I'm not a communist. Yeah, so it's 70 are hurt, including 62 officers, as Hasidim storm a police station, and it's from 1978. They took over fatal stabbing of an elderly Jewish man. Like, people will tell you that the Hasidic Jews run New York, they own New York, and they are generally allowed to police their own community insularly, just like the Amish, right? So it's my buddy told me about this the other day, Adam Nutter. I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's a libertarian comic, and we do another show together, 5 till midnight. And he used to be a cop in New York, and he told me about this. In the precinct, it's been 50 years. They still call it they call it something. I wish I remembered, something Jewy or Jewish. But that's the overlapping freaking governments in the same area. That basically it's essentially a jurisdictional fight, just like the thing happening in Texas right now. A jurisdictional fight between different governments, because we think about the state and federal governments as part of the same, but they're distinct entities, and they vie for, and when their incentives are in line, the members who are part of that organization, their incentives are in line with the organization if they benefit from the organization expanding in power. And I think that's why we see it.
The patronage, one of the big pillars of patronage that sort of helps illustrate this and fixes a lot of incorrect thinking it's very simple. It's just no one rules alone. No one rules alone. When people think about oh, there's some African dictator or whatever, they think basically everybody in that country over there just listens to this guy because he's the most evil or whatever. No. It's never like that. It's never like that. No one rules alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've all got lieutenants and whatever. It's like a whole feudal breakdown. It's like even at one of the most basic, like big men. I probably talked to you guys about this before. Onga's Big Mocha, but it's like horticulturalist pig farmers on Papua New Guinea. There's like this famous documentary from the 70s. And he's a big man. He's got like 4 wives. His wives are like an economic asset. They each have their own house. They take care of pigs. They look miserable. It looks like it sucks. But he has lesser big men who are like other dudes who like they have some wealth, but not as much as him. And it's a redistribution ceremony in their culture where like he gets so many pigs, he throws a big mocha. It's just a party, and there's like, and he's throwing the biggest mocha ever. And I'm sure that having a Western camera crew following him around helps with his status quite a bit as well. But he throws the biggest party ever because all these other lesser big men, they give pigs to him, and they're there at his party, and their legitimacy is increased, just like Onga's, who is shown to be the best, because it benefits them as well as benefiting him that they're below him.
If you live in a third world country, it is not a terrible idea to make the leader of your country whichever person is the best at scamming money out of first world countries in aid. It's not a bad idea. There's a lot of countries that do that.
And that's like, if there isn't an effective bureaucracy, and there isn't going to be an effective bureaucracy without the culture of an effective bureaucracy, which means that people have to be committed to it, then that's the only way it's going to work. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's because like, this is why you can't input a Western form of government over Afghanistan. They have no culture of that happening. It didn't spring up naturally. They have their own versions of governing themselves, and they don't want to have it imposed on them. I mean, it's the same thing as Reconstruction in a lot of ways. And after Reconstruction ends, you see a lot of reversion back to the
in Birmingham, they love the governor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, have you guys thought about that with the Civil War at all?
Maarek?
Yeah, you mean after the end of the occupation of the South, I say a reversion to the old political arrangements
after the failure of the North to continue their occupation.
Careful, we're this is an away game.
No, it's not. No, please. No, it's yeah, this is you're in very friendly territory.
Well, speaking of history,
extraordinarily conservative audience, guys.
Speaking of history, I mean, have you noticed there's this thing we've been playing with a little bit lately? So the libs have there's like on the cutting edge of like the academic left, they're doing this new thing with Reconstruction, where they say that Reconstruction failed because they're like, you know, Reconstruction ended, it failed because of like basically kind of guerrilla war type things in the South, which is not wrong. That's not incorrect. But I mean, they're basically doing this just to have this sort of specific emotional thing about like it's because we didn't kill all the Klan guys and stuff like that.
Go ahead.
And I always like to I'm trying to like cheer this on in a way of like, good, okay, put that in the history book. Tell them that you tried to occupy the South, and groups like the Klan and all these sort of veteran groups and stuff ended it. But they don't want to do that either. But it's very fun. But the more interesting thing about it is like it's clear that like we're not even talking about history anymore. We're just talking about like what is the best movie version to give to children to give them the right emotional effect from history class. It is so bizarre.
Well, let's frame this in terms of home cooking, right? This is that. So, what happened after the Civil War ended? You had a military occupation of a third of the country of the South. And what was the goal? The goal for Republicans was let us go sweep in here and replace all of the existing relationships between people, not just government or military, whatever, but like commercial, social. Let's change all of these paid. We're going to give all these clients new patrons, and more importantly, we're going to be the only available patron for this new group that we've created, freedmen. It's like we're going to take control over all these old relationships, and you're going to do it at bayonet point. You're going to do some of it with ballots. You're going to do it with expanded federal bureaucracy, like we've noted before on our podcast. The Justice Department didn't exist before Reconstruction. It was explicitly created for the purposes of Reconstruction to take people away from the South to try them on federal charges in the North or in Washington D.C. But either way, that was working in the sense that there were several states where they, like, if you look at the 1870 was it 72? Yeah, 1872 election, a lot of southern states couldn't vote because they were still occupied under military governments. You had Republican governments that had been set up by the military that still existed with fusion tickets, and maybe there was hanky-panky at the ballot box or whatever. But the important thing is the idea was we're going to replace what used to be a democratic patronage system, and it was explicitly a patronage spoil system. This is like they didn't even deny it back then, and we're going to make this our own. The problem with this always is, like, the enemy, like in warfare, the enemy has a vote, right? And you can't set up those networks. This is why, like, if you want to say tomorrow we're going to go fix Mexico, we're going to set up a good government in Mexico, but you can't do that because the cartels just and kill your people. They'll kill people in the voting lines. They'll kill people who are trying to give out money. They'll steal it. They'll set up their own not literally underground, but underground networks, and you can't do anything about that unless you have military supremacy. Like, that's the real story of Reconstruction. They lost the ability to operate in the South because there were enough people who didn't like what they were doing that it would be physically dangerous to be a Republican in a lot of these places. And
oh yeah,
when we're all around the same age, we're a little bit older than you, but when we learned this in the history books, it was like, well, what happened was there was Reconstruction, but it didn't really work out, and the North didn't have the political will, and the 1876 election happened, so they just kind of gave up on it. But like, that's not true. That's never true. Nobody ever just gives up on taking complete political power. You run into a hard limit of how far you can expand, and like and ironically, usually when you hit that limit and then your empire, your whatever, has to collapse back into I won't say simpler, but like, I guess, more streamlined form, a lot of times you go back to these direct relationships between, the patron and client, which is why this is so important to think about in the first place.
Yeah. And there's, okay, so one of the things I've been talking about a lot recently is a concept called diffusion. So cultural diffusion. There's a few different ways on how it's been defined in anthropology on how culture can spread. And one of them is hierarchical diffusion. And I think that hierarchical diffusion is extraordinarily powerful because it's the idea that there's a hierarchy of people, and the people at the top of the hierarchy, their culture spreads down. So you have something like, it can be as simple as like a game like golf being associated with the upper class. And people will copy what rich people at the top of hierarchies are doing. And there's a natural incentive for you to do that. So of course they try to replace the system of government by maybe, if most people don't believe it, they put people in the right positions of power through simple incentives of providing people with something, that the right people are in the positions of power based on that hierarchy, so they can spread naturally the beliefs and the actions that they want from people based on those positions being available to people if they, toe the line. And the same thing happens in academia today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like it didn't work because it didn't work for a number of reasons, obviously, but like that was their attempt. Their attempt was to like over time have the right people in the right positions that people just fall in line.
You said for obvious reasons. What like why?
Wait, when did I say for obvious reasons?
You said it didn't work for obvious reasons.
Oh, did I say obvious? I think I meant for multiple reasons.
Oh,
Like
I'm sorry.
it's because it's a foreign structure being imposed ultimately on a people that it wasn't native to. Like that's what war is. It's instilling your will on your enemy. And your
Oh,
enemy probably shouldn't be people that you're considered your own countrymen, but that is what it is, and um that is what like instilling a government over someone else is.
this is a great.
Um
This is a great point. You okay? I follow you now. Like, well, let's get spicy. There have been people. There are a lot of people who say that we're all Americans. That, like, let's say the American model of government, the liberal democracy, blah blah blah, whatever. This is not something that is actually universal to people. It's something that appeals to a very specific group of people, and outside that group of people, it doesn't really catch on so well. And like we've kind of seen this in our adventures in the Middle East, right? They're not super
mhm.
interested in doing things this way.
But it
Uh,
works better in Iraq than it does in Afghanistan, and that's for clear reasons of the history of those countries. Iraq has a history of state-based government, whereas Afghanistan, a large part of it, does not.
well, the spicy part I'm getting at here is, could the argument be made, and I'll leave wiggle room so nobody gets in trouble, that if you have, like, say, so there are systems that are novel and systems that aren't novel. Like, right before, a military leader coming into a region and setting himself up as the king, and then making his generals his vassals. That's a very common, almost you pretty much universal system. I think everybody on the planet has experienced that at one point or another. It's like the next step from people being in tribes. Feudalism, one way or the other, not capital F feudalism, but like this is something that everybody does. But like liberal democracy maybe doesn't work that way. And if, for example, you have a country of people who are like English settlers, and they filled the country up with people who weren't English, liberal democracy could be impossible, because you now have a country full of people who don't even like liberal democracy. It's not what that's not how they roll. That is nothing. It's not in their wheelhouse. And by doing that, you have destroyed the I guess the what the original design of your nation was supposed to be.
Right, and it is an imposition, but that imposition doesn't necessarily just have to be forced. I mean, it was forced a lot of the time, and this is like, we're talking about the Civil War. We haven't talked about slavery, but like, yeah, so slavery was the system, but like another thing that is also a very bad thing is like genocidal colonialism, which is what the United States was practicing at that time, and this is what I believe happened, but this is also like the way that it's phrased by the woke college kids. So if your argument is that like the South's method of governance is like it justifies them being invaded just because of their method of governance, I mean I would argue that it doesn't the genocide of the Native Americans justify the same thing. And it's true that there's other examples in history of like the ideology of framing a something as a moral problem and changing your ideology to say that this is not an acceptable action. We're going to do something else. It's usually something that benefits a culture a lot. Like the British Empire, they end slavery, but they end slavery because it was already going out in their culture. So then they make this moral paradigm shift where they're like, okay, we're gonna listen to the abolitionists. We're gonna uplift their perspective so that people believe that slavery is wrong, which I mean it is. I think it's wrong, but they're going to we're going to make slavery illegal, and then they explicitly use slavery as the justification to conquer places in West Africa and to privateer against Spanish vessels, and they put in these systems of government that these same left wing people think are exploitative and the worst things ever, and justify like, and they're just evil men, and we have to take down their statues. But like, those are the people who are ending slavery, and yes, they were imposing this new order. So it's always tied in with like spreading your own system of governance, your own system of culture, and that's how these belief systems and socially constructed like East India Company organizations, that's how they spread out.
You see
uh,
this, this pattern is all over the place. I mean, and it depends on how far you want to stretch it. So I mean, like you could take a look at so you could take a look at Caesar's conquest of Gaul. Or this was justified out of self defense, which that's something we'll see that a lot. And was that really justified? I mean, it had been hundreds of years since the Gauls had raided Rome or whatever. That kind of gets dicier. Now you go to sort of to slavery. I mean, this is something that I mean, it would not be. This isn't controversial in small settings with people of a decent intelligence, even super leftist or whatever. But everyone knew slavery was on its last legs in America, just like it was elsewhere. It was going to go away on its own anyways. As time went on, and basically it was going to likely happen like it happened in England or whatever. People, there would be some kind of fund or whatever. People would be paid some amount of money, and they just wanted it had went away, and it was likely to go away with some form of industrialization, these kinds of things going. That wasn't in question. There was a lot of, didn't you have people, there was a lot of sort of people with the same minds, the conquest mindset up north, that were like, oh, yeah, it's going away, but we can use that to go F people up. And now you can like take that as a huge example. You don't have to take my word for it over. Let's look at sort of what these, we'll take a look at something like you go look at like any kind of activist that is any sort of activist that is sort of involved with like families and stuff like that. There's something you'll see a lot. I don't know what her name is, but she's like she's an activist to end the what do you call the family structure for Northwest European?
The nuclear family.
Nuclear family. She's like, so I had this political project, this crazy political project, and these books and a foundation, and if these people donate me money, I'm going to do something about this nuclear family. Everyone knows that, all these, when you drive down Michigan Avenue and you see all these white picket fences, and everyone has their golden retriever outside and their station wagon, and this reality which we live in, which, by the way, they're describing a reality from a long time ago. If you look at any kind of statistics, the family's already toast. It's already toast. It's going away. It's going away anyways. However, this is sort of a justification. And if it's something that's already happening, it makes the justification way, way easier. If you say, I want money to stop a hustle that's going on right now, like, we're going to start a foundation to stop the United States from running all kinds of weird business scams in Eastern Europe or the Middle East. No one's going to give you any money. You're going to get arrested or something like that. This is just something that happens a lot. Things that are sort of already in motion become a good justification for conquest, because the whole there's a lot of reasons for it, but yeah.
Things already in motion become a good recipe for conquest. And it's also like, you have, of course, the states are individual entities. I think anybody who went to high school history in the United States like has heard the term of like, or the phrase like, that it went from being the United States was to the United States are. And the, like, right now we're seeing in the Texas border, there's a power structure, a power struggle between the federal government and the state governments. And this was really, really, this was decided in this war in a lot of ways. And I think this is a big part of why the people in charge, the Federal Department of Education, have a huge incentive to really, really hammer in the point of slavery, because it's that the states, the states having their own individual autonomy. Like the federal government wants to take that autonomy away. Like every organization wants to fight or other organizations for control. It just happens naturally because of the incentives towards the people in those organizations to expand the authority of it. So not only was it the federal government, but also these individual states that were in the North, they did policies, especially under Reconstruction, when there were states still under military occupation. They weren't being allowed to vote, so they used that as an opportunity to enrich themselves at the expense of the South. And this is demonstrated in any number of numbers. There's no metric. There's a bunch of different policies they put in place, including the obvious, which was like pensions to American military veterans, but it was preferential tariffs, which was another issue between some of those southern states. And it also showed that, yes, the federal government, if they wanted to, because the Union is not the Union. The Union is the United States. Calling it the Union is just a measure of making it separate, like the country didn't attack itself. But this is where the federal government becomes more of a leviathan and more of a expanding force that takes power away from the states at their expense.
And the South was treated the same way that third world countries were treated throughout the later periods. I mean, even up into like the 50s or whatever. If I wanted to produce goods in Montgomery, Alabama, and sell them in New York City, it would cost like $3 in postage to send that to New York City, whereas New York City could send things that they produce to Montgomery, Alabama for like 15 cents. And you have, which is, that's
Really?
how, yeah. This is what we do all throughout. We're going to take your raw materials, but we don't want any of your finished goods. You can't sell any of your finished goods up here. We don't want that. Because there's a lot of economic power that comes from that, and they did this just for forever. I mean, this didn't get thrown out to like the 1950s. You know what I'm talking about, Maarek? I mean, this is a niche topic, doesn't come up a lot, but George Wallace sure talked about it a lot.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but yeah, this is one of those things that when we started taking deep dives on Wallace, that surprised me. That there were still policies from Reconstruction, economic policies from Reconstruction that were well into the 20th century that I'd never heard of. So especially, wow. I mean, for one thing, in Virginia, these things, but Virginia's not a cotton state. It's a tobacco state, wheat, corn, a lot of corn. It's not a cotton state. Like the cotton states really got effed during and after the Civil War, because it changed their entire economic structure, and in some ways they were turned into vassals for a long time, because
and we weren't allowed to. It's like, okay, you have to industrialize. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to do that, and then they would stop us from doing that, from making any money off industrialization.
Yeah, and I mean, this is intentional, and and you can see it obviously. Like, guys, I'm from Connecticut. I mean, we can look at a graph and see the disparities in income between our states. It's extraordinarily significant, and it's because like the country was started, and it benefited their own areas. I mean, you can have the idea that, okay, every senator represents every American, but in practice, it's just not true. A system is what it does. And, yeah.
What you were saying earlier, the stuff that's happening in Texas, if you look at I'm gonna say a lot of the normie reaction to it, they don't necessarily understand what's going on, and I don't mean that in a mean way, but like it's framed, and I mean it's good that if you're Greg Abbott, it's good to frame it this way. It's framed as like, well, we're actually enforcing the laws of the United States, and the president's not doing that, so we're doing it, and that's a good way to frame it, because you won't you're less likely to get in trouble. But like, what's really happening is you're having another test of federalism. Like, do we still have federal? Is that still actually how the country works, because going by the law, yeah, the states are autonomous or like political organizations. They're part of they're part of the federal government, but constitutionally, going by court precedent, everything, supposedly they have the power to rule over themselves on most things. But like
most of it is just done by denying funding. It's like
yeah,
yeah.
And like that's,
Which is huge, because your state would be screwed if you did it. So you would be just diminished over time. It would have the same effect.
Because you can't say that people in Texas don't have to pay federal income tax. So they're paying the income tax, they're not getting anything back for it. So you would be being taxed. Now, they've used this cudgel on the South specifically in not recent, but like the late 20th century and mid 20th century. They used that cudgel before and it's worked. However, there comes a point where that might not work, because whatever you're mad about might be worse than the punishment that could be meted out against you. Like the border situation is one of those examples. If you live in Texas, the people like hundreds of thousands of people crossing, they're not like an abstract thing like they might be to me living in Virginia. Like when you're in Texas, you have to deal with this personally every day of your life. Like the local services, your personal safety, the safety of your loved ones, your schools, everything. This directly affects you. So you can reach a point where, okay, I don't care what you're threatening me with. I want my state government to do something about this. And this is where the conflict comes in. Do we really still have federalism? Because that's an open question. Like the Civil War ended real federalism. Abraham Lincoln invaded the southern states and said, actually, the president is in charge of everything. You're not what we said we are. It's not these United States, as George Wallace would say. It's the United States. But they're still like we are still much more federal than like almost any European country, most Western countries. These states have a lot of autonomy, but it's untested. And this is one of those situations. This is why people get excited. And nothing might come from this. People might back down. It might disappear into the ether, and then just another news story in a week. Or this could be a situation where we're going to find out how much power states really have. Because in theory, Greg Abbott can direct the literal military units that he controls to stop the federal government from going in there and removing barbed wire, whatever. He has that power. And at that point, it becomes, who are those soldiers going to listen to? And like, this is really when the rubber meets the road. These are the questions that go way beyond rule of law or your government system or any of the stuff you learn in the civics textbook. It comes down to, who do these people, who the National Guard officers, the National Guard soldiers, the people in that area, who do they think is dad? And if it's Texas and it's Greg Abbott, then you've got a conflict. And if it's Joe Biden, whatever, well, we just continue down the road we're on now, and federalism's effectively dead. Don't worry about it.
I think Texas was a perfect place for this to happen, because I think there's even more of a national spirit there.
Yeah.
When they teach Texas history.
Yeah. New York City and Texas both have this weird thing of this sort of local pride thing that is more than other places. It's kind of peculiar. Like when I lived in Texas, like everything around me, and it's funny because I brought all my stuff from Texas, so I still remember. It's like if you go buy paper towels at the grocery store in Texas, they're Texas paper towels. I kind of like that kind of thing. New Yorkers are also like this too. They feel like they have this sort of extra pride. I think more places should be like that. But there's something, a little aspect about this. I'm curious what you would think about this as when you talk about history and academic stuff, there's this thing comes up. So right now there's this question that comes up all the time. Whenever news happens, it's like, okay, is this it? Is this the thing? Is it happening? There's this sort of two ideological camps. There's like the it's happening people and it's not happening people.
And nothing ever happens.
Right. It's interesting I was listening to someone else talk about this earlier today, and I was listening to Argent Templar, and he was sort of like, what would it like? this is an interesting lens to apply to like to past history, because like imagine if you're reading the news every day during World War II, like when the British Army escapes at Dunkirk, is that like a nothing ever happens moment, or is it like, okay, this is a actual this is a crucial bookmark along the history of the war? Like what is like it's weird to I mean, everyone can see a clear trajectory with the way their lives have changed since, especially like something like the 1970s or something. I mean, was it happening when gas went to three times the whatever price it went to in 1972? You could still buy a car, you still drove to work, everyone's still going to doing their things, but you know, we have these huge systems. It's not like a video game where the game just ends. Life will go on no matter what happens. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you decide like what is a significant event, where and would people even recognize that if it happened?
Well, okay, so I think that it would be relevant to mention. You guys have probably heard of the number that like in the American Revolution, only 3% of the country participated. You know, mostly patriots and also some Tory loyalist, royalist militias, and like it's you know, in most times in history, I think that there's like there's a gradual shift over time to where you almost don't feel it, and there are maybe some certain large events, like something like January 6th was a pretty big event because it was like, oh wow, people actually broke in to the White House. That's crazy, and you know, there's I'm not sure what I can say on YouTube, but obviously there's some stuff with that. But like, and then and those are like big moments, and those happen as part of the gradual shift. And there's bigger moments like, you know, something like the burning of the Reichstag and Pearl Harbor or 9/11. I mean, these are massive moments where you can tell exactly in the moment that there's a moment of change. So it's both, and they're punctuated by these larger events, I think. So like culture is shared by definition, and it's the aggregate of the rules in your society. But culture is individual people, and people's perceptions. It's based on their nature plus nurture, so their biology plus their learned cultural experiences. And people's learned cultural experiences, the language that they know, like you know, the hierarchy, their behavior, their governing of behavior. Each individual person has a slightly different perception from other people in their cultures. There's differences between different people. Some people are the same religion, they're a different race. Those carry different implications. Maybe you're both white Catholics, but one's American, one's Canadian. One guy's from North Carolina, Connecticut. So people have overlapping similarities and overlapping differences, and so their culture is really anytime that you establish that there's a culture. That I established that I'm from the Connecticut culture, but I'm also from the New England culture, and I'm also from the American culture, and oh yeah, my background is also Irish. There's all these different overlapping things, and any sort of distinction that you make towards like this is an Irish culture, this is an American culture, these are all themselves socially constructed ideas of what they are. Really, it's all just, you know, DNA and your lived experiences in your brain affecting how you act into the future. So as you have people age out over time, and their perceptions start to change, power waxes and wanes between certain individual groups of people, the culture will shift. And as the culture shifts, um, some of it's gradual and some of it is like in a moment, because people have like their underlying belief systems, the ways that they evaluate information, what they've been taught, their view of the world that affects how they're going to view a situation. People in Connecticut are going to react differently to a situation than people in North Carolina, and different people will react differently. But when a particular event happens, which through the lens of enough of a percentage of the population, and the bigger the event, the greater the effect and the larger amount of people that it affects, that can cause them to have a shift in understanding. It's almost like an activatable hive mind trait. Like after 9/11 happens, and there's an immediate shift in the culture. There's all this, and you know, people know that this is going to happen. This is scientifically verifiable, that the approval rating of the president goes up to 90%, and suddenly everybody wants like Muslim people's heads on a stake, and there's people beating up Sikh people because they look like Muslims. And you know, that didn't happen too often, but that is an event that at the extremities, it caused these horrible things, and like the invasion of Iraq, like people lost their minds, and in retrospect, everyone's like that was a terrible idea. But there was like this shift in the way that people evaluated information, and when an event happened that was so great, it exploded outward. So I hope that made sense.
Well, you used a great example, and like the original question, like how can you tell? The original question is basically how can you tell when it's happening? Like let's use the American Revolution as an example, because this is a great one. There's after the British and Indian War, there's the Proclamation of 1763, where King George basically gives the entire Midwest to Quebec and says, okay, all right, colonies, you guys this is your territory. You don't get to go past the Ohio River Valley. Like, I'm sure that when King George signed that and when in Parliament, that they didn't really think this is a big deal. It's just like, we're managing the possessions over in North America, no big deal. This was a huge deal to the colonists. So it says, like, this is one of the things, like, you can say this is where the road to the revolution began. And then you had, like, tea or taxes and stamp taxes in the 1660s and 70s, and people didn't like it, and there were fights over it. But still, is it happening? I don't know. Maybe a small minority of colonists wanted to do more than just complain. On the other hand, you have something like Lexington and Concord, where people there are shots, there are militia shooting British regulars and British regulars shooting militiamen. Everybody knew at that moment, yeah, it's happening now. This is the shot heard around the world. We know what happened, but it had all been building from a long time before the French and Indian War. But from there, that's when the boiler began overloading. And when it finally
gradually and then all at once, right?
Yeah, and this is something that when historians talking about the American Revolution love to do this thing where they say, well, actually, only 10% of the colonists even supported the cause of revolution. It's like that was true in like 1774, but as soon as the bullets started firing, everything changed overnight, and roughly half wanted independence, and then eventually by the end of the war, the Tories were such a small minority, they self-deported to Canada and have never been a political force in the United States since then. It was never a big deal because this shift happened. How I link that to today is, well, like I said, this dispute at the border that Texas is having with the federal government, this could just be another thing that, it is definitely an escalation when the governor says, I'm not going to obey the president of the United States and I will use physical force to stop him. Even if he doesn't do that, just saying you're going to do that is an escalation. You are ramping things up. But this could all be diffused tomorrow. Or some 25-year-old guy on one side or the other could accidentally squeeze the trigger, like we think happened in the massacre of Boston, and you were on the road to something that nobody expected and maybe a lot of people didn't even want.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Bog Beef.
It does make me think, though, that it's almost that modern politics is kind of inoculated itself to this kind of like it's happening stuff, because it seems like people with a strict sense of what is a significant event, they will usually place it around things that are formal, like Germany declaring war on the United States, or Pearl Harbor is illegally attacked, and all these kinds of things. Or in the modern sense is the election. One president's out and a new president is in. Where although that's kind of a laughable thing, because of course, looking back, like how much does reality change when there's different people in office? It's usually almost nothing. And everyone can tell that now. But you can go back to the World War II thing. The United States was at war with Germany like well before people started shooting and stuff. We would like take our destroyers and like put them in between the car.
we were attacking their U-boats in the Atlantic and the undeclared war. We were literally firing on them. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that's hilarious. But you take all that, it's like, okay, well, nothing's really happening unless, I guess in the today's news example, the governor of Texas would unfurl a scroll and say, on this herefore date, the United States, the Texas is at war with the United States. Of course, when you look at, when was the last time we declared war on anything? None of this stuff, like, no one. We have the massively industrial society. You have a 24-hour news cycle. You have a world where lawyers and consequences are kind of like are always the thing that everyone is always covering their ass. I don't know, like, what does happen formally anymore? Practically nothing. Someone goes to jail. There's a plea deal. Do they get 20 years? No, they got 10, and then that's 7 years of a parole and this and that. I don't know. It just seems like anyone waiting for formal news of anything in today's world is of course nothing ever happens formally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
problem for them. Because
What has ever happened what has happened in the past 20 years formally between, let's say, the United States and China, or United States and communist country Cuba?
Well, I guess they officially ended the embargo, which did have some real implications with Cuba,
That does, yes.
but that's the only thing.
Yeah, this is the thing, and this is we have we have a empire that's like bureaucratic in nature. It's run by, I don't know. People argue whether they're merchants or priests, but whatever. They're not run by aristocrats. They're not run by military men. And formal stuff for them is bad. They want everything to be in the gray area so they can scheme. That's what they do. They're schemers. And this is moving stuff, declaring a move. Puts, like, for one thing, you're at risk, and another thing, you have to admit what kind of power you have and what you're doing. Just for one thing, if you've ever been in an office environment, you know how this works. Once you do something, declare something formally, you have responsibilities, and nobody wants that. They want everything to be. They want to have a meeting where everybody communally agrees on the course of action, so when it inevitably goes horribly wrong, that nobody in particular can be blamed for it. They don't want responsibility. They don't want accountability.
They want a diffusion of responsibility.
I was funny. Yeah, it was. What was it then? Well, there's an example in Herodotus when the Greeks are deciding whether they should go to war with Persia, and the Athenians have democracy, so they kind of talk themselves into this being a good idea to go to war with Persia, compared to, like, I'm kind of cribbing from Dan Carlin here. Apologies. The Spartans have a king, and the king's like, that sounds like a dumb idea. No, I'm not going to do that. But when he pitches it to the masses, the democratic masses in Athens, it's like everybody thinks this is a good idea, and nobody's ass is going to be on the line. If the fleet gets destroyed and the Persian king is angry and wants to burn your city down, well, it's not your fault. It's everybody's fault. Whereas if you're the king of Sparta, that happens, that's your fault. Somebody's going to chop your head off for that. This is an inherent problem with our governments, our governmental system, not only governmental system, with the people who have power today. They don't want the buck to stop here. They don't want to be the guy. They want to be the guy behind the guy.
Right. And I think this is how a lot of, like, things that most people would consider just completely evil happen in the world, because there is a diffusion of responsibility, and people benefit from these systems. Like, like the military industrial complex is a real thing, and it has incentives, and there's real reasons for it existing. Like where I live, like my home county is economically a thing because of the nuclear submarine industry. And just the fact that it's there instead of on the coast of Connecticut instead of on the coast of North Carolina or something speaks to the power that Connecticut is able to muster to attract a naval submarine base, a federal one, to its lands, for one thing, but also like people's jobs are like tied up in that. And you talk to one of these people, and I, as like an anti-war vet, it's like it's a thing for me. But like, I talk to people, and they work for the defense contractors, and they don't have any inkling of a sense of responsibility for them being a small part of this giant cog that fires missiles with freaking knives on them at children in Gaza. Sorry, but that is a thing. That's a real thing. There's a diffusion of responsibility away from that. It's no one's responsibility, and the norms have been established at an international level, and no one's asked. Like, no one's going to. There isn't anyone who can step in the way of a social construct that's like going off on its own and doing its own thing, and involves many people that benefit from it.
Well, that's ultimately what everybody wants in life. Well, not everybody, but that's just what the base human desire is, to get something for nothing. And that's what this, to have power but not have accountability, to have authority but not have responsibility. Everybody wants that. Well, I mean, not everybody. This is something that people want, and once you can do that, that's the worst possible system. It doesn't matter if you're a monarchy, democracy, whatever, clan, tribe. If people have power but they don't have accountability, they're not responsible to anything, they don't have any obligations, you're effed, because they couldn't rule well if they wanted to.
Right, because it's just, it doesn't matter. And this is okay. So two things: corporations as social constructs, that like there is a responsibility. The structure is created, especially in publicly traded ones, that they will try to make more money. So like their interests and their incentives based on the structure of these corporations are in line with the success of the corporation. So they're going to justify whatever they have to make money. And if they don't, someone else is going to, because the structure is set up to hire people to do that. And legally, the fiduciary responsibility is there. So you have people doing awful things in corporations. I have partial hearing loss because 3M decided actively as a company, like, I guess, there was a bunch of individual people that decided this, but they knew that the earplugs were bad, but they calculated with whatever those math nerds that calculate the risk are, actuaries, that the lawsuit from it, when they were inevitably found out, would be less than replacing them. So they were just like, whatever. And now like a bunch of people have hearing loss, and that cost of treating that hearing loss and paying out disability payments is now felt by the federal government, rather, and it's spread out throughout the entire population of the country. And crap, I did have another example that I thought was good, but
this is kind of a field of what we were talking about. But like the protections that like a limited liability corporation has by definition in America, yes, it was all kind of predicated on what you just said, that they're going to be doing this they're going to have fiduciary duties and blah blah blah. But more and more recently, we've seen these corporations acting in ways that don't really benefit their shareholders, and they're acting in ways that are going by the law. They're not doing what they're supposed to do, but they still have these legal protections. And if I were an enterprising, let's say right-wing politician, I would advocate maybe removing some of those protections, especially from these hostile corporations that are neither really effectively making money for their shareholders or holding up any obligations that they might have to the country that protects them both legally and physically.
There's a great theory that I like a lot. It comes from Brown University professor Mark Blythe.
Yeah.
And his idea is this, and I'm sure he's not the only person that's thought of this, but the idea goes like that. Basically, this is fun to tie into things like cyclical history and stuff. But basically, that any system, especially complex systems, that every complex system has a sort of is going to have an end date where it gets figured out, where it's like after a certain amount of time, people sort of learn all the shortcuts, or they figure out things that these sort of man-made systems are never foolproof. Nothing is. It's kind of like think about antibiotics or whatever. Antibiotics are probably the biggest human invention ever, or at least the biggest one in the past 200 years or whatever. I mean, everyone knows there is an end date. I mean, so people become resistant to this, all this kind of thing. You can look at sports. I mean, basketball has an end date. I mean, people kind of figured out the game, and it's certainly not. It's not going to get. I mean, you can change the rules, whatever. Anyways, part of the idea is that uh, any system needs to have like unless the rules are radically changed, or it's not defeated and replaced by something else all the time. People are going to find out any kind of weird trick, and especially the more complex it gets easier to this thing that we see all over the modern world, where you externalize costs and you all this kind of stuff. There's just a million ways for it's kind of like there's people right now in Africa that are exchanging little handbooks that say, here's what you tell here's what you tell the people at the US border. And we figured out because of these guys did this 20 years ago, or there's some lawyer telling them over here, well, there's this weird exception for a refugee, make sure you check this box and that box, and these things just get overwhelmed. Obviously everyone in the world cannot live in the United States, but the hustle will go on for a while.
They're doing their best to try, though.
So I don't think this is what you were talking about. So I have two things. I have something to show you. But like, this might not be the same idea that you're talking about, but there's this book called A Hacker's Mind, which I'll put in the description below. I loved this book. I guess it's got 3.3 rating out of 5 on Audible, which is surprising, but how the powerful bend society's rules and how to bend them back. Like he has this concept called hacking, which is the idea that like you should or that systems are like, the rules are made to be a certain way, and then in response to those rules, people change the way they act and they outsmart the system and they start doing things. And one of the most famous examples, and I think this was in like Freakonomics, and this is like a behavioral economics thing, was that in India, in a city in India, there were a bunch of snakes. So they were paying people to catch the snakes, but then people were farming the snakes or rats or something. So they just had farms, and then they had more rats than ever because people were farming them to give the pelts to say that they'd killed them. But one of you, and you guys are going to love this. I'm sorry, but before I go into that, Bog, did you recognize that book that I shared at all, A Hacker's Mind?
No, I know, but I love the idea. I'll check that out. I really
sounds
like
the same idea.
I really like that kind of stuff. And in poker, you have a lot of this kind of mindset. I mean, that's basically what like every sort of card count cheat. Like if you're a card count cheat, you're someone who probably makes a living doing some other kind of gambling, and you get a text that says, "Hey, there's a Indian casino that is now paying a 4 times bonus on Saturdays," or something like that. And just that little bit makes the math enough for you to go in there and bankrupt this place. One of the most famous, probably the richest gambler there is in the United States for the past 100 years, whatever, is a guy who figured out that Vegas just incorrectly counted how they did their so when you bet on a basketball game, you can the bet gets updated at halftime. So you can bet that the Knicks are going to win this game, or the Knicks are going to win by 10 or 20 or whatever. And Vegas just basically, they did not for a long time more fouls get called at the end of a basketball game as opposed to the first half. And at the end of the basketball game, go into the bonus, whereas you get points for more fouls. And also, more importantly, the clock the clock gets stopped for all these different things. So statistically, a basketball game has more points scored in the second half than the first half. Vegas just forgot to update their theorem for this for a long time, and this guy realized this, and he made just hundreds of millions of dollars until they fixed this.
That's amazing.
How they fix it?
They just changed their algorithm or whatever to make it so that it accounted for a large. They used to just take the score and cut it directly in half, rather than weighing it higher later. You could, but this affects so many other things. Like, one of the reasons why the university system is so huge is that, I mean, all of these people 60, 70 years ago, lots of independent thinkers, people at their own house, our own parents or grandparents were like, okay, I know how, like, okay, we're in this America place, right? Man, that guy over there has got a much nicer car and a much nicer house. How can we win at this whole America game? I got it. We're going to make our kids doctors and lawyers. That's what we're going to do. We're going to send our kids to the university. That's where they train the doctors and lawyers. They're going to become a doctor, lawyer, and we're going to win at this game. And then, everybody tried to do that. Now you live it creates all this sort of bizarre system effects.
Yeah.
I want to hear about the rat thing or whatever you're going with next, because I'm intrigued.
It was a separate thing. Before I do that, just another example. Bog, I just put a reminder in my planner. I'm going to send you some behavioral economics book recommendations, because that's exactly the field that this is. It's a bit of a Libby field, but I think that there's a number of books that you'd like. The other thing is Freakonomics, which is like the OG. I loved them when I was like 10 years ago. It's like an NPR thing. Real lib over there. I don't listen anymore, but I really liked his ideas. He talked about, like, they did this with names, and this is hierarchical diffusion that I was talking about earlier. It's from the top down. It's from the hierarchy down, where economic incentives and in other ways as well, but economic incentives, like, people decide to go up. And from a behavioral perspective, it's behavioral economic perspective is not just necessarily money, but things like status and a bunch of other intangibles. And, like, people, they try to move up in class, but the closer you are to the number one of the elite, like whatever you consider it, the president, billionaires, these people, the closer you are, the more of an understanding you have of it. And they demonstrated that names over time, names that were upper class in like the 90s or the 80s, would then be middle class in the 90s, and then would be low class in the 2000s. They demonstrated this in a spectrum of income, which I thought was really cool. And it's evidence of this hierarchical diffusion thing, and the idea of being closer to it, making you more able to expand on it. But yeah, so the thing I wanted to tell you guys was, like, some of these companies, right? So these companies that are maybe not doing what would seem obviously is in their best interest, but this has a lot to do with how absolutely destroyed our financial system is. Because there's the real economy, which is goods and services that are produced. And then there's this much larger derivatives-based market. And this derivatives-based market, while not being the real economy and being like, this is the fake, but this is where the real money is, because it's a much larger market, because they're like bets on bets, and they're bets on what company is going to go up. They're not just simply buying stock. This isn't a system that is doing what it's supposed to. The idea of having common stock as a company is that you purchase part of a company, they get money that they can invest to make more money. And if they're really good at making money, then they'll make more money, and you will make money as the owner. Originally, it was all about dividends and all about, there was some appreciation, yes, but there was, it was real and it was tangible, and that is not true anymore. So yes, while it may seem obvious that doing whatever they're doing is not what's best for them as a company, what's true is that based on the derivatives market, there are some incentives in place that have done exactly what we're talking about here, which is these forces have subverted the system from its original purpose, which is having these companies that will make money, and they will continue to make money for the people that buy them. And the incentive structure naturally makes it reproduce, because the money will go to the companies that are making more money by growing and being more efficient, and making different different innovations. But what's happened now is that you have these companies like Vanguard and BlackRock that own such a large percentage of these companies, but they don't own them directly. They own them through index funds. And index funds, this is something that's going to be huge coming into the future, but index funds are like everything. Everybody in investing talks about index funds. They have for a long time. They've grown in popularity over and over until right now, which is instead of in the past, it was, you buy companies, you buy mutual funds. Now it's just you buy index funds. It's simple. It's a diffusion of risk. The market always goes up. It's always going to go up. It always has gone up. But like they convince people of this. So the amount of index funds that people have bought has become a huge portion of the market. So there's all this money, not just people's individual funds, but pension funds. They're all in index funds, and it's a larger percentage. But what happened in the past is that when people owned companies, or there were a bunch of individual mutual funds by a bunch of different regional banks and all these different competing forces, whereas now there's very few banks, and you have these larger companies like BlackRock and Vanguard. And all of these individual corporations, which have lessened and lessened in number and variety and increased in size, and all these individual people, all these funds that go into index funds, they're not voting. That's key, is that there used to be an incentive for the people that owned it, the people that owned the companies, to vote on the officers and of the company, like CEOs, the C-suite of the company, that they would make money. They would vote on things in the company, and their incentives were in line because they would make more money. But now all of those shares in index funds, the voting rights are all to these massive companies that have trillions and trillions of dollars in organizations. So now those large corporations, they're not acting in support of those individual companies. They're acting in support of themselves, and they're using the voting shares that they control to exert control over these companies. So now they're not acting in the interest of those individual companies. They're acting in the interest of themselves. And the interest of themselves is to homogenize the market and to have control over all these different companies. And it's something that they're doing successfully. And they're doing it without really telling anybody. And nobody is talking about this. It's just not being talked about, but they control these companies. And when you see something like DEI, it's a complete ritualization and standardization of this idea that they should have control over all these companies, because they're creating this specific ideology that they're putting out to all their companies, and they're forcing them on it because they're the ones who have all the voting control over that company, over all of the companies now, because index funds can cover the entire world's market. So it's all of the companies. It's every single one. And additionally, the other thing that they're doing, they're extraordinarily involved. They completely control the venture capital. So every single new company that comes up has its culture from the very beginning. If they want to get venture capital, if they want to grow to have any possibility of being $1 billion company, they're going to be imbued from the very beginning. That corporate structure is going to be just, you can't, once a social construct is created, that character, you can't get rid of that without completely destroying it. So now all of that DEI is in every single new company that will ever grow into $1 billion company that's been created in the last 5 years. And it's going to continue to be that way. And that's what I have to say about it.
This is the genesis, I assume, of the, we keep hearing so much about ESG scores and how you have to have a certain ESG score to, I guess, in this case, to get funding for venture capital for whatever. They use this ESG test or whatever as a way to have control over. Damn, it sounds like I never heard it described this way, but basically every major corporation.
It's and it's all of them. They control all of them, dude. Like it's like the East India Company, but it's the Earth Company. There's a couple of them, but there is a few of them, and they all think the same way because of, again, hierarchical diffusion.
There's a so diversity inclusion, it has a lot of different layers to what it means. Especially it's important on who you are. If you're a private citizen, some of the things I'm about to talk about may not be as like that's your direct experience. It's just like, oh, diversity, that's the people that sort of telling my son in school that he's a evil colonizer or whatever. I get it, and that's really all that's gonna matter to you. However, there are a lot of different ways this functions, and one thing, if people want to see this, or just here's my bibliography here. who's the guy's channel where on YouTube we went on his show? He Benjamin Boyz. Okay, so Benjamin Boyz was this guy that was attending school at Evergreen College when they had that big famous diversity flip out or whatever. And there's something that he kind of documented over time, and you could see like, look, I'm not saying this is the sum of all like what diversity and woke stuff is, but you can look at, so you start out in a situation where there was this guy that got hired as a administrator for the school, and the average tenure for an administrator at Evergreen College was less than 3 years, because Evergreen was this very unique college. It was set up by idealistic people. And they were like, okay, we're going to make a college where professors have all the power. They were tired of apparently outside of this, in universities, you've had a increasingly large administration. More and more people are the administrators, and the professors have less and less power over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a bare minimum administration. We're going to have just a couple people, and instead the administration will be done by the professors. What will happen is
co-op, basically. They try to do the college as a co-op.
Right.
It sounds like a good idea to me, and I know it's going to go horribly wrong because I know what it is, but it sounds like a good idea.
It was a good idea. It worked until...
Yeah, and so people like you can sort of there's a couple of people that got famous from this. The result, there was a lot of very good results from this. So basically, what would happen is
went on Joe Rogan was at this place, right? That got
Weinstein.
Yeah,
Dark Horse. I like him.
Yeah, and so so what you would do is basically every third year you would not be a professor and you would go work in administration. By doing this, the professors could muscle out any kind of administration. And because of this, you could do a 4-year program at Evergreen, and those since the professors had total control, you didn't go take a bunch of BS elected, you didn't do 2 years of stupid classes you didn't want to take. You could, if you wanted to work in film or whatever, you worked with film people all 4 years.
That's awesome.
Yes. And people got from what I understand, you got an extra 2 years of graduate school or whatever at these sort of important, this was especially effective if you wanted to do something like I want that was I don't know, if you just wanted a random degree in you just wanted a piece of paper, who cares? But if you wanted real specialized knowledge and from that was hard to get, that normally people had to go to a graduate school and stuff, this was an awesome deal.
It was kind of the way that academia worked in the distant past, right in the 19th century. This is really how academia would have worked. But they were doing this into the 21st century, Evergreen. Not entirely, but the way he described it. Tell him what happened with the president.
Okay, so George Bridges gets elected, and he's a very smart. I mean, he gets appointed as the president, and he's the president of a school where the president has no power, and they change him out like bed sheets, so you're not going to be the president there very long. And he gives this great speech at the very beginning where he's like, yeah, I'm going to be the last president that's hired at Evergreen. He he gave this a sort of Stalin-esque speech. It's yeah, I'm going to take this place. I mean, he's a very driven guy, and here, so basically what he does is all those sort of diversity freakouts and stuff were stoked by him. One of the big news that came out there was they took a university administrator hostage, which they did. They took him hostage, and he let them do that because he wanted to create this crazy, insane environment. And by doing this, because one thing you might think about, okay, if all the professors are in charge, wait a minute, where's the diversity department? Well, there might be one, but they don't have any power because that's administration. That's the people. Those aren't professors. Those are people like presidents and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? at a regular university, the diversity department is administration. So what he did was he caused this crazy freakouts, and it brought this huge temperature to the situation. And then he said, okay, so we have this big problem with all these sort of these events. Hey, what we're going to do to get control of this is we're gonna appoint a diversity inclusion office, and this office will have sort of final say over anything that happens at Evergreen, because
diversity and inclusion is so important, so vital. We
right,
have to do this.
that's the only people that could sort of tell, like a crazy, like say some crazy rampaging native speaker was like taking something hostage or whatever. Who could tell them to stop? Well, I guess the diversity inclusion department. So I'm trying to sell it as something that's like where you could see, like, oh well, I could see that, I guess. So anyways,
And I guess what happens.
right, and so what he slowly
he asked if you can guess what happens. Yeah, good for it.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, unless you want to say, I mean, I
No,
just
no,
think
no,
it's
no.
funny.
No,
Yes.
sorry, yeah, I didn't hear you. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think what's going to happen is he created a crisis, and now he's going to use it to create a DEI office. But since he's the president, he gets to pick who's in the DEI office. And obviously, they say that, oh, what they have to do is appoint a permanent president, and then he is reigned as the chancellor of Evergreen College.
That's exactly what happened.
I mean,
patronage.
It wasn't formally like you're going to be the permanent president, but yeah, he added this layer over top of the existing power structure that I won't say he controlled, but like his people controlled. Because I'm sure he is definitely a true believer in this stuff. But their religion took this over, and he was like for the time that he was there, he was the Pope. He
had formal. So what he did was, so he made a diversity inclusion office, gave them authority over everything. So that was the new king, and then he made himself his layer above the diversity office, and that was it.
And they let it happen because the diversity office was then the legitimate source of power, but he's the one who legitimized it. So he legitimized himself, and he had his own clients in the diversity office.
Yeah, like Stalin wasn't the president. Stalin was mostly like the secretary and had these sort of Stalin was never like never had like the supreme leader official position in Russia, but he was above whoever was sitting down there.
It is important to note that he did not become the like president for life of the college. He eventually, after a couple of years, he resigned after like the college enrollment shrunk by half and they lost a S-load of money. So like he didn't successfully become Stalin. He didn't die in office, but he upended the power structure and permanently changed the school for the worse. Like they don't operate the same. Yeah, he destroyed what was special about the school. And I want to add, the thing where he was under siege by these really angry people of color and people who have sexual identities, whatever. Like that wasn't a new strategy. That happened during the civil rights movement in the 60s. You had university professors being quote unquote taken hostage by black radicals and stuff. And like those guys were on the same team. They weren't being held hostage. They were part of the deal. Like that was, and I've mentioned it before. I can't take credit for the phrase, but power petitioning itself. That's what George Bridges did, and that's what they did during the Civil Rights Act. And this is what these people are really good at. You don't have the formal power yet, but what you do is you get a lowly person who's been oppressed and sad, and they, please, sir, could you become a ruthless tyrant on my behalf? And you're like, well, I don't want to do it, but I guess I'll have to. For your benefit. George Bridges, he didn't want to do all that stuff. He didn't want to destroy Evergreen, but he just had to do it because, big fat Naima Lowe asked him to. And this is always how this works.
It was funny for how he, a lot of those people that he was sort of playing, they thought that they were actually in charge there. They didn't realize that he was just sort of using them as a pawn. By the way, like as it sits today, their enrollment in 2000, their enrollment went from the 4000s to the low 2000s. in a span of like in the span of his tenure. And they got rid of like everything that made Evergreen special, like in terms of it was a public university. They got that had that super special way it was designed, whatever. That's all gone now. That's all. It's just some other college now.
Well, that sucks. Sucks, man. Yeah, so I got two things on this, man. There's a perfect example of this. You know, I was a Marine, and I deployed on a naval ship, and it's still true that on naval ships, this is a holdover from when this was a thing. But the officer berthings, the officer place, well, their staterooms, where the officers live is on the top decks of the ship. The middle decks have the Marines. The lower decks have the sailors. And the reason for that is because there was a patronage system with the Marines where the Marines were paid more, given slightly nicer stuff. They were essentially the Praetorian Guard of that ship. And they were physically between the sailors and the officers in case of a mutiny, because the Marines are going to be loyal to the officers because that's who's giving them the nicer. And that's a very direct version of this.
Almost have kind of like the middleman minority in there a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the other one, right? Like you have it's always like the white man's favorite minority that gets put in, and sometimes they're a willful participant in it because it benefits them as well. So like, you know, this just happened this week. They're starting to, there was a new federal ruling related to some respect to indigenous artifacts and indigenous peoples, and the federal government decided that they're now, this is actually happening, they're closing down displays at Smithsonian museums and other federal museums, which are the best in the world. I mean, like I was yelling about this earlier on Twitter because legitimately, like, I hate New York City. I hate the city. And there was one day where I went to New York City specifically to go to the Museum of Natural History, which has like this huge collection of indigenous art, which is like my favorite stuff, indigenous art and history and material culture, all of it. And like I spent open to close, I was in this museum looking at this stuff. And I went to goddamn New York City for this. Nothing makes me go to New York City except for museums and comedy. But like now what's going to happen is that there needs to be a tribe or a nation needs to give their permission. But how this happens in practice is that it's only federally recognized tribes. So there are a lot of tribes and nations that aren't federally recognized, that there isn't enough evidence of their existence as a people for them to be recognized by the federal government. So number one, those groups have no representation. And those are the weaker ones. Those are the ones that weren't in positions of power, which, you know, is fine. And it also means that the structures that are recognized by the larger state, these Indian reservations are essentially vassal states of the United States, semi-autonomous vassal states. And the government that has been put in place, like in a lot of ways by this higher federal structure, is instructing, like they have their people in place in these places in a lot of ways. And they're doing their bidding to an extreme end. And it sucks. And same week that they take down Jefferson.
Well, so what happens if the tribe decides they don't give their permission? What happens then?
Well, then it can't be displayed. And I assume I assume a lot of this stuff can be taken back from the Smithsonian's. I assume that, but like, dude, the Smithsonian records, they have so much stuff. They have like tons and tons of stuff in warehouses. They lose it all the time. There's like priceless ends and ends of culture just sitting in boxes that no one's opened in 85 years.
It's like the Minnesota flag thing that just happened, where they changed their state flag and they said, we don't like the Indian on the horse that's on our state flag. We think that's racist, so we're going to change it. So they just removed the Indian from the flag. It's like, that's what you're doing with this stuff. You're taking these artifacts out of the museum, and okay, then we're not
Land O'Lakes box.
Yeah, or Aunt Jemima. We're just not going to learn about your tribe anymore. You're just going to vanish into the ether of history. Like, okay,
only white people are allowed on products, Maarek. You only have the Quaker Oats dude and the chick on the sunscreen with her ass hanging out.
Mrs. Butterworth is still going strong, but Aunt Jemima got canceled.
This stuff is the example of this kind of thing is the British Museum and stuff from Egypt, right? So what people don't want to hear is there's a lot of weird people who they want the British Museum to give all their stuff back to uh these people in third world countries, whereas where these things are not valued. All this stuff is just going to be sold on the market. That's what happened. That's what's always happened. They don't have the infrastructure to. It's not like if you give these things, if you give like all these Egyptian artifacts back to Egypt, they're just going to be sold off to Chinese investors and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's I had written about this thing on Twitter like last week where there was like ISIS going around, and everybody who funded ISIS, look up who funded ISIS and controlled ISIS. I'm not allowed to say it, but I hope you all know. And they just, they tortured this archaeologist for a month, and he wouldn't give up the location of these Roman artifacts.
Was that Petra?
No, that's in Jordan. They never got over there. I've been there actually. That was a cool place. But no, it was a different one. Petra is pre-Roman. It's like 4,000 or 5,000 years old, I think.
Oh yeah, Petra's southeast of Israel, isn't it? Isn't that like in the Saudi Arabia?
Jordan. It's in Jordan. I think.
Gotcha.
I think
You'd be the expert. You've been there.
Well, I couldn't locate on a map. I think it's north of Lebanon. It's like yeah, we'll look at a map.
It reminds me of there's a I like looking at the Mafia a lot, especially because it kind of does all this patronage kind of stuff. But the Boston Mafia, and I don't know that this sounds like something where the I don't know if other people know this, because I know this from Mafia stuff, but there should be some kind of like documentary or something. This is the kind of thing that people would find super interesting. Sorry, go ahead and finish this. I was just trying to hold it while you talk.
No, yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah. No, that's it. You were more right, Maarek. It's like east of Israel. But yeah, came in right here. Jordan's the best, man. I mean, people don't know the geography of this place. They really don't.
I just Googled it. Oh yeah, it was Hatra that the ISIS destroyed their artifacts. Yeah, so he like they tortured him for like a month, right?
Yeah, that's what it said. Yeah, it's pretty awful. He didn't give it up, and then I guess they found the artifacts anyway.
The stuff about the British Museum is so fake because, I'm not the first person to point this out, but a lot of that stuff the reason that the British have it is because they went into Egypt and nobody there cared about the stuff that was there. So They were able to just cart it off, and people weren't mad that they were taking the Rosetta Stone. Like the Rosetta Stone was just a rock to the people living. And
did they find it?
Yeah, it was like it was in a wall. Somebody had used it as a brick in the wall, and the British found it and said, "Hey," or French actually, it might have been a French. A French found it and said, like, "Hey, wait a second, that looks important." Like there's a lot of stuff that's like this that wouldn't matter. Like you could make the argument that picking up Indian arrowheads is a hate crime or whatever, but like
I got in an argument with an archaeologist about that last week. It was a huge thing.
Really?
Over on anthropology Twitter, we were at war with each other. Like we know we have like mutuals, and she was like quote tweeting me, telling people to unfollow me.
What is the basis for her to believe that? Like these aren't like, you're not digging up graves. These are like something that they were tools that people used.
Dude. Yeah. So her argument is that so here's the thing, like things don't have value to archaeology when they're not in their archaeological context. So like if there was a site and this has happened in the past before there were like archaeological methods, like there are locations where they were disrupted and people took all the stuff out of it, and then the stuff's not in its context. You didn't find it where it lied, so you don't understand the context in which everything was. Like you can't find a single trash heap, and then it gets into very technical archaeological stuff that really only the academics care about, but it is the basis of our larger understandings in aggregate of a bunch of these different things. So it is important, but those arrowheads are found everywhere. You can find them in streams, and like this ideological, puritanical brown professor is arguing with my dumbass on Twitter, and I have more followers than her, which doesn't really matter. She still has the credentials. Yeah, right. It does in the sense, like, in our world it matters more, right? Because that's how we just determine credibility, but they don't care.
Well, no one
To them,
cares
I'm
what they
just a
say is the
troll.
thing. Like nobody listens to them really. They do get paid, which does matter. I will say that
Look,
the Arrowhead thing is weird because that's like if you found on my property a 30-06 casing, you're like, don't touch that. That's a sacred American artifact.
yeah, it's dumb. It's dumb. Yeah. But like the thing is though is that she's a professor at Brown, and she or maybe she's a PhD student, but still, no, I think she was a professor. And she has me blocked now, so whatever. Um, she is teaching Ivy League kids who are in these networks that then go into these positions. They're at the top of this hierarchy, of this hierarchical diffusion of these ideas. So they have to be the most pure. So they have to go out on Twitter, and it doesn't matter if they're getting yelled at by me and 7,000 of my friends. It doesn't matter. It's like, because they are still correct and they're showing their purity. They're showing, oh my God, I'm virtuous signaling. I am so pure in my commitment to academics and to the hierarchy that I believe in so much, the social construct of the university system, that she was literally telling me that you do not get you don't get to own what's on your private property, that it's the property of the state. And oh, I'm the person who is from the state, or she's from connections to the state because of her position, that I'm the one who should come and take it. I have to take it. I'm the endowed person for this. So literally arrowheads that you would find on your property, she thinks that you're doing that she called that looting. Literally, to me and other people, called it looting to pick up arrowheads on your own property, and mocked my commitment to anthropology because I had this idea. I swear to God, this is the conversation I had last week.
It's the same. It's the same. Sorry, go ahead, Bog Beef.
That's funny. Well, I'm going to finish that story about. So
yeah, I'm sorry, Bog. I meant to get right.
No. I interrupted in the middle of that. So anyway, so you have the Boston Mafia. You have there's this guy Bobby Donati from the Patriarcha family, and I'm using these words to try to be like this is not Al Capone, right? So these are knucklehead criminals, and they were paid to go into the Boston Museum to get some jewels. And while they were in there, they were like, hey, look, those are some paintings. Let's load them up. And this was in 1990. These guys are, they're not educated guys. They're knuckleheads. They're people that are normally like selling drugs and stuff like that. These are the kind of people. And so Bobby Donati and a couple of guys from the Boston Mafia, they just grabbed some paintings, what they thought were likely some paintings. In fact, they did the biggest art heist in like world history, right? So there were 3 to 5, but I think it was, let me see. Okay, 3 original Rembrandts. I mean, 2 of these are oil paintings. One of them was a self-portrait on like charcoal pencil, whatever. About 5 Degas, an original Manet or whatever, a 2,000-year-old beautiful Chinese vase, a French imperial eagle from Napoleon's army.
Wow.
So this stuff is like, so how much it was like 5 original Rembrandts worth. So this stuff is worth like about 500 million is what it's been estimated at. And so you have this crazy situation happen. So the federal government and lots of other people immediately got involved, and they were like, look. And the mob, like, they shut down. The mob does crime every day, right? So they treated it like other crimes. They're like, hey, we're not testifying, all this kind of stuff. And the government was like, look, we don't care about you anymore. Like, we'll sign any deal. Please just tell us where this is. This is not like you knocked over a bank. Like, everyone in the world wants these Rembrandts in the hands of civilization again. And they were just willing to, they were telling these guys, look, we'll do anything, we'll sign anything, we'll in fact give you more money. They offered them $10 million. They said, please just stop this and just tell us where this is. And the guy ended up getting whacked before an unrelated thing, because a guy gets I had to look it up, but he got killed in some kind of drug deal or something, and now no one knows where this stuff is, and nobody has any clue. I mean, so a lot of the guys in all those guys that were in the mafia at that time, they've told the authorities everything they know on this, because they've been told, like, and they realized, like, look, like, we get it, you're criminals and stuff, but this is different. We just really, really want these Rembrandts back. And they've told them everything. They think that the paintings are buried under a concrete slab in Florida for some reason.
I know why.
Go ahead.
Well, okay. Wait, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is something that I've heard about before. There was actually a problem after this. Some criminals, and this is somewhat true, they're being used as insurance. They're a get out of jail free card. And it's actually happened from this. I think there have been other art heists because criminals then think that they can get out of certain crimes by having these art pieces. They created an incentive structure.
Yeah, and people like people honestly would have let them go from anything to get those Rembrandts back.
I know, and they probably still will, is the thing. So somebody eventually can be like, I got this. I'll show you where that is if you let me get off for beating my fucking wife.
Garlic Jimmy Pardo or whatever was the last guy who knew where this vault was that contains the priceless paintings, and somebody whacked him over, like, I don't know, a bookkeeping business.
Hey, look, those are my people, man. That is Boston Irish. That's all me. Those rich people.
Oh, that's true. You did say Boston mob. I apologize. It would have been like Potato Jimmy O'Hare.
Well, there was
some dudes drunk on whiskey just stumbled in, grabbed a couple Rembrandts between beating each other. Sorry, go ahead, Bog.
Yeah, it's unclear whether, I mean, so I think that the Italians actually took it. It's not for sure.
Oh yeah.
But the Irish, the Irish were definitely involved in this. It was I don't know, guys from the Dorchester neighborhood and stuff like that. But
I mean, I'm aware, like, this is a thing we know about New England, because it's like it's our, it's our, yeah. So I was so happy when you started talking about it, because I knew it.
Yeah, and one of the Rembrandts, it's called A Lady and Gentleman in Black, is incredible. I mean, it's an incredible painting. I mean, it is it's an incredible painting, and literally it's just gone. It's under some Guido's pool in Florida now, you know.
Or he could have sold it to somebody. Like, imagine if you were a private collector, there would be nothing cooler than owning, like, the only Rembrandt of this thing, and it's stolen. That would be a really cool thing to own. A lot of times that probably happens too.
There's definitely some sheik in Saudi Arabia that has some hidden bedroom, and he invited out, like, Mark Wahlberg out over there, and he was like, hey man, you want to see something? It's like, I got fucking something back here.
He's got a cheetah on a leash already, right?
Yeah. He's like, you know what's cooler than a cheetah on a leash? Rembrandt's been missing from Boston for 40 years. This dude's bunker.
But
there's probably something like that. Sorry.
Go ahead. One of the people they questioned said that Whitey Bulger had the paintings and gave them to the IRA.
Hell yeah, brother. That is awesome. That's my people. Oh God.
Well, I mean, like, these paintings were worth enough. Like, if you're in the troubles, you're in this guerrilla war. 500 million is enough to turn the tide of a war. A small war like that. Absolutely.
There was a lot of money going from. There was a lot of money coming from New England, from Catholics to the war effort there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the British were very aware of that.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you commit a genocide and you create a diaspora of 4 million pissed off drunk people in another country, and they like take over the entire population of the area, so it's just all of them. So then you're like a fourth generation full-blooded Irish person, and even into the 21st century, you're still pissed off about a genocide based on potatoes.
I guess I want to ask what your opinion on the Fenians was, huh?
No, you don't. I actually, it's funny. I'm recording this episode with you guys. And so I'm relaunching the show, and I'm putting a few on the back burner, and I'm going to release them. I'm getting ahead. The first release, the 50th episode, is with, and this is already released at this point, it was with an Irish nationalist from Northern Ireland. Which, you know, it's a little bit different of a conversation, but it's a really good one. Do you have anything else to say on that, Bog?
No, not really. It's I mean, it's a fun story to look at because there's still like I don't know what the reward is. It's the largest reward that's offered by non-state actors. Like outside of giving America the location of who El Chapo or something like that. If you're a sort of private detective in your house, you could make 20 million if you could track down where those Rembrandts are.
Oh my God.
National treasure moment for us guys.
Yeah, it says the offer is still at 10 million, but is this the one you were talking about? Because this is really nice.
No, that's another one. That's the other room. I was thinking of the but yeah, that is it's a lady and a gentleman in black.
Is that here? Maybe it's not on this list. Oh, okay. I'll just Google it from here. Sorry, did you say something, Maarek?
No, I was just looking at your screen.
Oh, yeah, okay. This one.
Oh, okay.
That is very 17th century Dutch. I'm really that's another New England thing. I'm very into the painting or into the like landscape naval stuff. Look at that. I don't think I can zoom in more. It's one of these weird art websites. They don't like let you look at it right, but this is it. It's in like the freaking IRA head's office.
Or some Guido's den. They're smoking cigars, playing cards, and like the Rembrandt's hanging on the back wall.
In New Jersey.
Napoleon put God, what's the most famous painting in the world?
Mona Lisa.
Yeah, Napoleon put the Mona Lisa in his bathroom.
Oh my God. Dude, that's a crazy flex. I love that. All right. Well, we're at like 2 hours and 7 minutes. I got no format for this yet, but that feels like a good enough time and a good stopping point since we were talking about art thieveries at the end, and that came to a close. So you guys have anything else to say on that? You have anything else to say on any other topic? And if not, plug whatever.
I'll shill us again. Good Old Boys, patreon.com/goodoldboys with a Z. Listen, we put out something at least once a week. Talk about history, talk about stuff like this. I love to talk about the 19th century. I'll go on and on about that for hours. And as always, patronage.
Current events.
Yeah.
Most people who do this kind of stuff don't do current events. We do current events. We read the news once a week.
It's funny. It's a different muscle group. I mean, you know that better than anybody, Samuel. It's like there's things that link it together, but it's totally different when you research something and you're talking about it in depth versus when you're just talking about what dumb Joe Biden did yesterday.
And that's Good Old Boys Radio live on Twitch Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. And probably about half the time you can find me in the comments hanging out. So listen to that. Yeah.
Hell yeah.